Welcome, friends of the planet. Happy Earth Day. We are thrilled to have a special guest with us today on Earth Day, Brian Skerry, who is a photojournalist, world-renowned visual storyteller, a National Geographic photographer, which is how so many people know his work. He's the author of 12 books, and now he's the star of a new documentary series and a book to go along with it, and a magazine cover. The Nat Geo cover this next month is Brian's next work. It's called Secrets of the Whales, and we're thrilled to have you with us today, Brian.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here, Monica. Thank you very much.
Let's just jump right in. Your latest project is so ambitious. I just can't imagine a National Geographic cover story, which people may not know, but those are a year in the making, plus a documentary series, plus a beautiful photo book that documents the whole work, all of the work that you've done. Tell us about it. Tell us about these whales, what you learned about them. I loved the beginning of the book where you talk about whales as other nations and tribes in the sea. Tell us about what you learned about their culture, about them as creatures.
Sure, yeah, I'll be happy to. Well, the genesis of this project really occurred over the last decade. The last big story that I did for National Geographic about whales was in 2008, and it was a story about the right whale, particularly focused on the North Atlantic right whale, which of course has the dubious distinction of being the most endangered whale in the world. And I compared and contrasted that beleaguered North Atlantic population with their southern cousins, went to a place in the subantarctic of New Zealand to where a new population of southern right whales had been discovered, and sort of had that magical experience with those animals. But in the decade or more that's elapsed since then, I've been very anxious to do another whale story, and I wanted it to be a multi-whale story. But the challenge for me was what the narrative would be. How do I connect the dots in a story that would make sense? I ultimately settled on this notion of whale culture. A lot of the scientists that I was talking to and publications I was reading, scientific papers, were sort of emerging with this notion of the fact that whales do have a very rich culture. My friend Shane Garrow, Dr. Shane Garrow, who's for the last 15 years has studied sperm whales in the Eastern Caribbean, he describes the difference between behavior and culture like this. He says, behavior is what we do, culture is how we do it. So for example, most humans eat food with utensils. That is behavior, but whether you use knives and forks or chopsticks, that is culture. And he said that, these whales are doing things differently within genetically identical species. In different places, they're doing things differently, and they're passing on those ancestral traditions to their young, and it's generational learning. So I began with sort of looking at the sperm whales, and he had identified about 24 families near Dominica in the Caribbean that all speak the same dialect. And he said that they don't intermingle with other sperm whales that happen to move into those waters. The first thing they say when they meet another sperm whale in the ocean is, I am from Dominica. And if the other one says, I am from Haiti, they go their separate ways. So in my mind, this was the neighborhoods of New York at the turn of the 20th century. You had the Irish and the Italians and all these little enclaves. So I extrapolated. I looked at orcas, and I looked at humpbacks, and I looked at beluga whales, and I could see that they all had these rich cultures. So for me, when I created Secrets of the Whales and then went around and pitched it to magazine and to Society for funding at Geographic, and then to the television division where it became this Disney Plus series, and then to books, it was always about, the notion of seeing the ocean through the lens of culture with these animals. And for me, that was a game changer. If it wasn't overtly a conservation story, because it was sort of the latest and greatest science about whales, but it could be the most important conservation story, because if we begin to see the ocean through that lens of culture where these rich histories and families and traditions live, maybe we'll do a better job of protecting the ocean and the planet.
Brian, when we see these beautiful nature documentaries through our TV, we're stunned by what we're seeing in that moment, but we as viewers don't often have an idea of everything that goes into creating a series like The Secrets of Whales. So I wanted to ask, how did you pick this title? And can you tell us a bit about how long the series took to film, how many locations you visited, and maybe some secrets you even learned while doing it?
That's a great question. You're right. These things do take time, and any natural history series or documentary requires a big effort and a lot of time, but underwater is much harder. And then when you're working with whales, trying to do something that quite hasn't been done before, that just adds so many layers of complexity. So in the end, it was a 3-year project from soup to nuts. It was 3 years in the field, maybe a couple of years of research on my end before that, and 24 locations worldwide. We essentially went from the equator to both poles. We worked in places like Dominica Dominica and Sri Lanka, Alaska, the Norwegian Arctic, the Canadian Arctic, the South Pacific, Tonga, Cook Islands, all of these places, Antarctica, everywhere, to try to focus on the four main species, again, beluga whales, humpbacks, orca, and sperm whales, and a bit of narwhal culture as well. So it took a lot. Once the series was greenlit, National Geographic brought in a production company called Red Rock Films, and I worked with them. I served as a producer on the film. We sort of organically grew it up, added these new locations beyond what I was going to do for the magazine and the book, and it just kept sort of building from there with James Cameron and Sigourney Weaver and all these other components, which were wonderful.
So incredible, Brian. What an amazing project. I was really fascinated by the content in the book, which I will again show folks. It's so beautiful. Whales do all kinds of things that I had no idea of. They sleep, they sing, I knew that. They nuzzle, they show affection in amazing ways, and they made eye contact with you over and over again. And I'm going to show folks at Old School this wonderful picture of a whale playing with you. Tell us about what that was like to interact with them. Really incredible behaviors did you get to observe because you were so close?
As I've often said, Monica, when you're working with wildlife in the ocean, unlike a terrestrial photographer, we have to get very close. We don't have the luxury of sitting in a camouflage blind and using a 600 millimeter lens. We have to get in the water. We have to get within a few meters of our subject and make pictures. And in the whales cases, usually it's all free diving. I'm breath holding. I'm holding my breath and swimming down.
Free diving. It was unbelievable to read that.
Yeah.
So you could do that.
Well, it's lots of training. Yeah. It's really on the whale's terms, right? So in my mind, there's sort of three levels of engagement. One is where they're not engaged and they just swim the other way, or as you're approaching from 150 meters away, silently, they just move on. So you never get that close-up view. The other one is maybe where they sort of are aware of your presence and are indifferent. They sort of tolerate your presence there, and you can get some interesting footage or images. The third, of course, is when you enter this sort of rarefied plane of encounter, and that is where they're engaging with you, where they are interacting with you. Maybe it's a calf, or maybe it's a socializing group of whales that, sort of let you into that moment. And that is extraordinary. I mean, to be able to get those moments, photographically, it's wonderful because now you're getting the goods. On a personal level, and I mentioned this in the film, on a personal level, it's so much different. In the Caribbean, after multiple trips, I think I spent 3 months in Dominica over 3 years. But on one of my last trips, there was a newborn female sperm whale calf. And, these are matrilineal societies. They're led by the wiser females of the group, the older, wiser females, and they need female calves. And here was a new one. And I got to name her Hope because to me, she offered hope. Scientists let me do that. But I spent over an hour in the water one day, maybe almost 2 hours, with Hope alone, just playing in sargassum weed. And in the film, in that episode on sperm whales, I comment that at some point I had to sort of just let my camera drop by my side and enjoy the time with that whale. So it is special. So the gameplay that you showed with the beluga whale, I had to design and build remote cameras to put in this estuary ecosystem in the Arctic where you're not allowed to go in the water. There's nobody around for thousands of miles. But even if you were allowed, if you put as much as a toe in the water, 1,000 whales would leave. They would be very frightened. So we designed and built these passive remote cameras, placed them in the water before the whales ever arrived. And then we didn't know what we would get. And a lot of the footage was blurry because it's a halocline situation. You're getting a mixing of freshwater and saltwater with that estuary. So only for a few moments each day, if the light was right and if the whales were there, we get it. But then we get them playing with stones. I call it a game of stones where they're picking them up and swimming around and playing. So just amazing, amazing moments. The whales were very generous for sure.
Can we touch on beluga whales again? You mentioned that it takes special equipment because they are really shy, but I didn't actually know this before getting more familiar with your work. But can you talk about the challenges of photographing and documenting and studying the species that is so shy and easy to spook? And, how did you come about maybe creating the special camera? Was there equipment like this before? Or was this just a design that you made based on your own own studies and interactions.
Thanks for that, Miro. I think that these experiences do require a lot of science. So when I created Secrets of the Whales, it was rooted in science. I had talked to a lot of researchers over the years to find out not only more about culture, but once I had a grasp of that concept, then it was about where could I go, what time of year, when might the animals be there, could I get close, what were the logistics, the nuts and bolts. In a place like the Canadian Arctic, I think in general, beluga whales tend to be very curious. They are very gregarious. The few times that I've encountered them previous to that, they are often quizzical and they'll come over to you. But this particular location is a place that they migrate to in the summertime. So they spend the winters over near Greenland, where it's dark 24 hours a day. And then as the sun emerges in summertime, they traverse the Northwest Passage, hundreds of miles. They come to what I call their summer resort. It's a shallow water place. The ocean is very shallow there. The river flowing into the sea is about 4 degrees warmer than the 29-degree ocean water Fahrenheit. It's like a day at the spa. They have these gravel bottoms. They exfoliate their skins. They're using it like a natural loofah. They're playing. They're having their babies. So all of these things are happening, but because they would be vulnerable in that shallow water, you're not allowed to go in the water. As I said, normally they might be gregarious and curious, but in this place they would be frightened. I had the idea to try to use these remote cameras. I was working with somebody who's become an assistant and partner of mine, Nansen Weber. His family owns a lodge up there. He grew up in the Arctic. He has an understanding. So he had a pretty good sense of what would be the only way we could do this. So I worked with some friends of mine, engineers at Woods Hole Oceanographic and with National Geographic engineers to design these cameras. We were using some proprietary cameras. We had to build special housings. We had to create coding, not me, I'm not a computer coder, but, so that the cameras would turn on and turn off at certain times. But it was all very unknown. And even once I was in the Arctic, they weren't working. And we had to use satellite uplinks so that I could connect with the engineers and they could recode every night and try to, get it right. So after maybe a week or 10 days, we finally had a system that seemed to be working. But then again, it's up to the animals and the visibility and the, behavior and all of these things. So much of it comes down to doing as much homework as you can before you ever go. But then once you get there, luck and serendipity plays a big role.
You certainly braved the elements. That seems like a really daunting task. But you also braved the whales. And I'll say I was really stunned at how close you got to orca whales, also known as killer whales. I once went on a whale watching trip where one of these animals devoured a seal in about 5 minutes flat, right in front of our boat. Wow. And I just can't imagine jumping in the water with them. What was that like?
Yeah, I think you raise a good point. And first of all, that must have been amazing to see what you saw with an orca predating on a seal. I've been in the water with orca a number of times. The first time I ever did was back in 1994. I was one of the first Americans to go to the Norwegian Arctic to try to photograph them doing this natural feeding behavior on herring. And again, that's always in the back of your mind. I think arguably they are the most intelligent animal in the ocean and easily could do great damage to us if they chose to. But every time that I have been in the presence of an orca, I don't feel threatened. I feel like I'm being scanned by a supercomputer, but I don't feel threatened. I think they probably know what I had for dinner last night. They know my mother's maiden name. They probably know everything about me, but I don't feel threatened. It's almost like there's a mutual respect, or that they certainly know that we are not a natural part of that ecosystem. This rubber-clad, air-breathing, semi-skinny whale is amongst them, and they just say, we'll let you be. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but I don't ever feel worried about it.
As we are celebrating the launch of this project, it's also Earth Day. It's another pandemic year that we're experiencing Earth Day. I wanted to ask, what is the message that you want viewers to take away from this project? Because it is such a bright spot during a time when, we've been stuck indoors. We've been kind of starved of nature in many ways. To be able to experience something as beautiful and wonderful as this, almost like going to an alien world that many of us wouldn't get to go to, and we have this beautiful sneak peek.
Yeah, well, you nailed it, Mira. That's essentially what I would hope people come away with, that we are not alone, that we are on this planet with other magnificent creatures. And if we can see, in this case, particularly whales, as having rich cultures, ancestral traditions that they pass on, that they have joy and identity, they share grief, they have emotion, those things matter to them. I think if if we as a species can begin to see ourselves intimately connected to nature and not above it or apart from it, and understand that our own survival is dependent on the richness of these other ecosystems. I gave a commencement speech the other day, and one of the things I said is that as a filmmaker, as a photographer, I like to begin by looking at the sort of 12,000 foot view of the place that we're going to explore, but then I come down to the micro level and I do portraits of animals. But the most fascinating thing to me is the connections, the fact that no single animal can survive on its own without other animals, or that no ecosystem can survive without that connectivity of other places. So I think, after a year of pandemic and being locked down, we should know more than ever now, we can't do this alone. We need family, we need friends, we need community, we need each other. I think if we are reminded of these things that the whales teach us, maybe there's hope for all of us.
What an incredible message. That is the perfect message for, I think, everyone on Earth Day. One last quick question. What is your Earth Day wish? If you had one thing you could wish for today?
My wish for Earth Day, Monica, would be that, like, I think what Buckminster Fuller said probably back in the 1970s, that we're living on spaceship Earth with no chance of resupply, that what we have here is all there ever will be, and that we have to do a better job of taking care of it. So, as we approach the 50th or 51st anniversary of Earth Day, I think it's important to recognize that our own lives, our children's future depends on it. I wish every day was Earth Day, but if we're going to sort of celebrate it on one particular day, then let's really do that right. Let's think about our decisions, about being good, informed citizens and consumers, and making decisions that will benefit all of us in the time ahead.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks so much for everything. This was wonderful. Best of luck as you launch this incredible series and the book and the magazine. We're looking forward to all of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And just to our viewers, you can catch it on Disney Plus today on Earth Day.